It was kind of surprising to me in the news when I found out the death of Charlie Kirk. Instead of kind of talking about the shooting from an investigative standpoint, I want to kind of explain the event from my perspective, from the medical perspective, based off of a nurse and pre-med students' perspective on the matter. Now, I want to put a disclaimer out there. This is not medical advice. It's only for educational purposes. If you really want medical advice, I highly recommend you go talk to a healthcare professional. This is solely my perspective on the event based on the education I received. I really can't show the video on YouTube. I was able to see the entire uncensored video, and I want to discuss the process of Kirk's death in kind of like the following steps. The first step is a speech where, ironically, he was debating another college student on gang violence and guns. The second part is the pop that everybody hears, which is the gunshot entering Charlie's left neck. And then it's followed by bleeding. Charlie tries to clench his left neck with his arms, and then there's kind of a jerking phase. Then he kind of rolls back on his seat, his eyes close, he collapses to the floor, and then later on he dies. And regarding the video, these are the steps that I saw from a medical perspective and want to kind of give some conclusion as to what may have caused his death. From a neurological standpoint, there seems to be damage to his C6 vertebra and the spinal cord that runs through the C6, which stands for the sixth cervical vertebrae of the spine. The function of the C6 vertebrae in the neck really involves making limb movements, head and neck movements, as well as balancing with the head, neck, and rest of the body. Damage to this cord makes me suspect that Charlie Kirk was starting to lose his balance from his head prior to collapsing, and that's why you kind of saw him slowly falling back towards his left. Neurological spasms also occurred during the death. So if the bullet was able to damage the spinal cord, that means that the nerves were trying to fire signals kind of as like a last resort to use up the remaining energy they had to make the neurons fire on the muscles. And then they shortly fuse out afterwards. This is similar to how if a chicken is sacrificed or beheaded, it's going to spasm. But essentially that just means the nerves are kind of using up their remaining energy prior to fully being dead. And that kind of explains the same reasoning behind Kirk's slight jerk prior to him rolling on his back and then falling to the ground. From a cardiology standpoint, my assumption is from the picture I've seen and the videos I've seen, it looks like it's slightly dark red blood that was oozing out of his left neck. So my assumption is this is probably his jugular vein, not his carotid. The carotids are located deeper in the human body than veins are. And depending on how deep the bullet penetrated, my assumption is that it was probably just the internal jugular vein that got damaged. Now, the internal jugular vein returns deoxygenated blood from the heart, and the lungs resupply the blood with the oxygen to flow back to the brain through the carotid arteries. If the internal jugular vein is damaged, this results in blood not being able to go back to the heart, get the oxygenated blood from the lungs, and then go back up to the brain to supply oxygen to the neurons and cells in the brain. This eventually results in loss of consciousness and necrosis of brain tissue, which means the death of brain tissue over time. And it's relatively pretty quick that a person loses consciousness if their jugular veins or carotids are severed. Now, again, from what I've seen in the video, and the angles are not really as high definition, it seems to me it was venous blood, but it might very well be arterial blood. I'm not sure. And that kind of leads me to the autopsy report. So as of the making of this video, there still has yet to be an autopsy of the event. And autopsies in medicine basically give a definite diagnosis as to how an individual died. It's typically done by specialized physicians known as forensic pathologists who do 4 years of medical school, 4 years of pathology residency, and then a fellowship in forensic pathology. So these are done by specific specialists to kind of give a more clear diagnosis than just me kind of putting out the theories as to why he may have died. The other thing I want to talk about is these sensations. So typically hearing is the last sensation to go away prior to people dying. A lot of patients, when they're on their deathbed or when they're in palliative care, they might remember people hearing them before they kind of pass on. My assumption from the event is Kirk may have heard the panic and the unease and tension from the crowd as his last senses before he died. Now, again, all those things are my take on the experience from a medical perspective as to how Kirk may have died. I do not condone violence in anyone, even those whom society doesn't like or seems to put at their lowest. And he's a human being. He has specific protections and abilities. And one of the things that I don't like is death and the death penalty and life imprisonment and demonizing people for their belief. There's no room for political violence. I just hope the best for Charlie's close ones in the community. And my hopes is, at the very least, this country can unite in its ever-growing division. I hope this kind of at least explains somewhat from a medical perspective as to what may have caused his death. Many thanks, and as always, cheers.